In the forgotten corners of a quiet forest, something waits. Something old, hungry, and rooted in the memories we bury. Tonight, we uncover the chilling truth behind a cold case that was never meant to be solved. This is a story of roots, memories, and a presence that never forgets. Turn down the lights and listen closely to Roots. The woods behind Susquehanna Road were quiet that morning, wrapped in frost and an unspoken stillness. The kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from the hush of things watching. Beneath the spindly trees, a worn cardboard box sat half-covered in brush and brown leaves, the sort used to ship bassinets. The flaps were caved in slightly from dampness, just enough to hint that someone was inside. College student Jamie Relf, trudging along the narrow deer path with a homemade animal trap under his arm, didn't notice it at first. He was there to check for signs of the neighborhood girl who'd gone missing the week before. No one asked him to look. No one expected him to, but he felt it was right. He stepped over tangled roots and into a shallow dip in the earth. A gust of wind stirred the bushes, and then he saw it. A pale limb. Small. Still. Jamie froze. He told himself it was a doll. A cast-off. Some child had discarded it. Maybe left it behind in the rain. But the closer he got, the more the truth clung to the edges of his mind like the fog wrapped around his ankles. His breath caught when he saw the face. It was a boy, young, no older than 4, naked, skin mottled and gray, hair roughly cut, a bruised line along his jaw. His limbs were too thin, too stiff. His fingers curled slightly inward as if they had once gripped something tightly. But now they clutched nothing. Jamie stumbled backward, dropping the trap. The sound startled nearby birds into flight. Their flapping wings echoed through the trees like a warning. The boy's body was taken by police later that afternoon. News spread fast in a city already weary from post-war unease and Cold War paranoia. But no amount of fear prepared Philadelphia for this. The child had no name. No parents came forward. No missing person report matched his description. The only clues? A battered cardboard box from a JCPenney bassinet, a faded flannel blanket, and the boy himself, malnourished, clearly abused but recently cleaned. His nails had been trimmed, his hair freshly cut clumsily as if done in haste. There were surgical scars on his ankle, his groin, and beneath his chin. Detective Harold Winters, nearing retirement, stood over the boy's autopsy table, arms crossed tightly. "I've seen bodies," he whispered. "Plenty. Men torn up in car wrecks, women shot by jealous lovers. But this?" He shook his head slowly. "This ain't natural." He didn't mean the death itself. He meant the stillness, the cold perfection. Whoever had done this hadn't just dumped the body. They'd laid it down carefully, wrapped it up, like they wanted to erase something, or pretend he'd never existed at all. At the city morgue, the boy's photograph was taken. First clothed, then unclothed, then propped into a sitting position with his eyes closed, attempting to resemble life. Morbidly staged, yes, but necessary. Police plastered the image across flyers and newspapers, hoping someone somewhere would recognize the child. They didn't. Weeks passed. Then months. The whispers began. Locals said the box was cursed. That animals wouldn't go near the place it was found. That kids dared each other to walk into the woods at night and sit in the clearing where he'd been left. One girl came home shaking, muttering about a voice that whispered her name. Another boy never came home at all. The city dismissed it as folklore. But Detective Winters knew better. The case had sunk claws into him. Each night he dreamed of the box. Only in the dream, it never stayed shut. Something inside would always begin to stir. He'd wake to cold sweat and the image of wide, glassy eyes staring back at him. On the edge of town, a woman named Evelyn Marsh watched the news unfold with twitching fingers. Her curtains stayed drawn, her lights low. Neighbors barely remembered her name, and she liked it that way. Some nights she sat in her kitchen, flipping through an old medical journal, half-drained teacup beside her, and listened to the silence. She knew the boy in the box. Not his name, not exactly. But she remembered his face. His real name had never been spoken in that house. Only boy. Sometimes it. Evelyn had been a midwife once, before the accident, before her husband died in a factory fire and left her with debts she couldn't repay. One night, years earlier, a woman had arrived at her door. No name, no explanation, just a child swaddled tightly in a worn blue blanket. "He's sick," the woman whispered. "Can't speak, needs care." And then she left. disappeared into the snow like a ghost. Evelyn tried to care for the boy, tried to feed him, soothe him when he screamed at night, but he never smiled, never cried, just sat, hollow-eyed, flinching when touched. Once she found him curled in a cabinet under the sink, rocking back and forth, whispering things in a language she didn't understand. It wasn't long before bruises formed. From what, she never said, only that he brought things with him. Bad things. Then one day, he was gone. No police were called, no papers filed. The woman returned, and Evelyn turned away when she carried him out in a box. "I never asked," Evelyn whispered now, rocking gently in her chair. Never wanted to know. But sometimes, when the house was quiet, she heard a knock at the back door, and a small voice, barely above a whisper. Cold. The newspapers would later call him America's unknown child. But in the spaces between silence and sleep, where shadows crawl long across basement walls and voices whisper from beneath old trees, he was never unknown. He was always there, waiting. 30 miles north, in a red-brick state-run psychiatric home nestled between dark fields and long-forgotten train tracks, a woman named Marilyn sat by a rain-streaked window, scribbling. She wrote every day. Crayon on yellowed paper. Circles, eyes, boxes. Sometimes a child, limbs too thin, fingers too long. Marilyn was 34 but looked closer to 50. Her hair, once auburn, now hung in patchy streaks down her back, clumped as if someone had taken dull scissors to it. She rarely spoke unless prompted, but every now and then her voice would break through the silence like a blade through flesh, and every time she said the same name. Boy. The nurses called them her episodes. They'd try to calm her down when she screamed at night, try to make sense of the drawings she left on the hallway walls. Most were too disturbed to see what she was really saying. But Dr. Louise Caro, young, sharp-eyed, and new to the facility, had started paying closer attention. One morning, Marilyn thrust a folded paper into her hand. "He was in the water too long," she mumbled, eyes darting, fingers all wrinkled, like raisins. Louise opened the paper. A crude sketch of a bathtub, water overflowing, a tiny figure curled up inside. Beside it, the words, "She washed him after." Louise felt a chill. She remembered reading something in the paper, the boy in the box case. The forensic report had noted water damage on the boy's skin, wrinkled fingertips, washed post-mortem, like someone had tried to clean him. She looked back at Marilyn, who was now humming to herself, rocking. "What do you mean, after?" Louise asked. But Marilyn only pressed a finger to her lips and whispered, "She's still out there, watching." Across the city, Detective Winters flipped through the latest folder of useless tips. He'd been about to retire 2 years ago. He should have been gone by now. Florida, grandkids, golf. But the boy had kept him here. He didn't believe in curses, didn't care for ghost stories. But this case, it felt haunted. He laid out the photos again. The autopsy, the box, the blanket, the boy's face, still, peaceful, but wrong. The way a broken doll looks peaceful if you don't notice the cracks. The phone rang. It was Dr. Caro. "I know this might sound strange," she said, "but I have a patient who's been talking about your case, details she shouldn't know." Winters raised an eyebrow. "She mentioned the beans?" Caro paused. "What?" "The last meal," Winters said. "Baked beans, found in his stomach, not in the house, not nearby. Whoever fed him didn't dump him." There was silence on the line. Then Caro whispered, "She drew them, on the plate, next to the bathtub." The next day, Winters visited the facility. He met Marilyn in the activity room, walls papered with crayon madness, the scent of antiseptic and cold lunches heavy in the air. She looked up at him with wide gray eyes. "You saw the box," she said softly. "You opened it." He nodded slowly. She leaned closer. She tried to make him clean, but it was too late. The bruises wouldn't wash off, neither would the screaming. Winters felt the hairs rise on his neck. "Who?" he asked. "Who was she?" But Marilyn only drew a symbol on the table, a tree, twist leafless. "She lives under the branches now," she whispered. "That's where the voice comes from. I didn't mean to help her, but she made me watch." She suddenly screamed and shoved back from the table, clutching her head. "He won't stop knocking." The nurses came quickly. Caro tried to apologize, but Winters wasn't angry. He was terrified. That night, he returned to the scene. Susquehanna Road, the woods, the clearing. The grass had grown back, but the air still held a strange weight, as if the trees themselves remembered, as if they leaned inward toward the memory of the box. He found the stump, the broken fence, the exact spot where the boy had been discovered. Then he saw it, a shape, just at the edge of the tree line, pale, slender, watching. Winters turned his flashlight on it, but there was nothing, only trees and shadow. Still, something tugged at his mind. Something he hadn't remembered until now. Years ago, during the initial search, a girl had claimed to see a white lady carrying a bundle through the woods. Police had dismissed it. No one followed up. But what if it wasn't a lady? What if it wasn't human? Back in the facility, Marilyn awoke screaming again. But this time, she didn't call for help. She walked down the hallway barefoot, the lights flickering above her. She stopped at the old supply closet, reached out with trembling hands, and opened the door. Inside was only darkness, but she leaned in and whispered, "Is he still cold?" There was no answer, just a sudden gust of wind that slammed the door shut behind her. In the heart of the city, Evelyn Marsh sat awake. She hadn't slept in days. Something was in the house. She could feel it. It watched her from mirrors, stared from puddles, reflected in windows but never there when she turned around. Tonight, the knocking had started again. Faint, at first, then louder, from beneath the floorboards, from the back door, from inside the closet. Knock, knock, knock. She pressed a hand to her mouth and whispered, "Please no. I didn't know what she was. I didn't know what she was bringing." Something moved behind her, a child's voice, no louder than breath. "Why didn't you stop her?" Detective Winters sat alone in his car, staring at the tree line along Susquehanna Road. It was just past midnight, and the heater hummed faintly, failing to chase off the deeper cold that pressed in around him. He wasn't sure what he expected to find. Maybe answers. Maybe nothing. But ever since visiting Marilyn, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been missed. Something he hadn't seen. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the old Polaroids again. Photos from the original scene, the boy in the box, the blanket, the flannel edges frayed like they'd been clawed. And in the background, just barely visible, was the tree. Twisted, bare-limbed, bark darkened from rot. It hadn't changed much in the years since. He opened the door and stepped into the night, flashlight in hand. The moment he passed the threshold of trees, the wind stopped. The air stilled. No rustling, no animal sounds. Just silence. His boots crunched over frozen leaves as he approached the tree. Its trunk was wider than he remembered. Gnarled roots spilled from the base like claws. The bark looked burned in places, charred symbols curling into the grain. He touched one. The flashlight sputtered. Then he heard it. Knocking. Not loud, not insistent, but steady. Knock, knock, knock. It echoed not from ahead but from behind him. He turned. Nothing. He turned back, and the tree was closer. He hadn't moved. His heart hammered as the knocking grew louder. Knock. Knock. Then a whisper. "She feeds the roots." Miles away, in a candle-lit kitchen in a forgotten corner of the city, Evelyn Marsh finally did what she had promised herself never to do. She went down into the cellar. The door groaned open, wood soft with age. The stairs creaked with every trembling step. Her candle flame wavered in the stale air, illuminating rows of jars, rusted tools, and forgotten furniture. And in the far corner, covered with a sheet, sat a bassinet. The same one she'd seen all those years ago. She didn't know why she kept it. Maybe guilt, maybe fear. She peeled back the sheet, empty. But on the pillow sat a single tooth, tiny, child-sized, yellowed with age. The candle flickered violently, and the air shifted. Behind her, a voice, gentle, feminine, and ancient. He screamed too loudly. I had to quiet him. Evelyn turned, but there was no one there. Only the shadow of a woman, long-limbed and wrong, etched against the wall though no light cast it. She fell to her knees and sobbed. "Please, I didn't know. I didn't know what you were." The shadow did not move, but the air filled with the scent of mold and old blood. Then a child's voice joined in. "I'm still cold." Back at the tree, Detective Winters dropped his flashlight. It rolled to the side, beam cutting across the roots and landing on something half buried in the dirt. A shoe. Tiny. Weathered. He knelt and began to dig, brushing aside leaves and packed earth. Another shoe, then cloth, then a small skull. His hands froze. This wasn't the boy. Not the one they found. This was another. Winters staggered back. More digging revealed more fragments. Bones, dozens of them. Small, fragile, forgotten. The roots of the tree grew through and around them like veins around organs. He stepped back, heart thudding, when he noticed something else. The box, buried shallow just to the left. Different from the first, smaller. He opened it. Inside, wrapped in flannel, lay a lock of dark hair, tied with twine, and a photograph, faded and water-damaged. A woman, tall, stern, eyes dark as ash. Behind her stood children, dozens, pale, silent. Not one of them smiled. And at the bottom, scrawled in shaky ink, "Property of Miss Lucille." Dr. Louise Caro sat up in bed, gasping. She didn't know what had woken her. Then she realized her apartment was cold, unnaturally cold. She walked to the window and looked out. There, across the street, barely visible beneath the flickering street lamp, stood a woman, tall, pale, wearing what looked like a teacher's dress from another century. Her arms hung too long, her neck too stiff. At her feet sat a child-sized box. Dr. Caro blinked. The woman was gone, but the box remained. In a dusty archive beneath the city, Winters stared at the photo again. Miss Lucille Garrow, operator of an unlicensed foster home outside the city, shut down after multiple children went missing. No charges were ever filed, no bodies found. But Evelyn Marsh had mentioned her once, years ago, quietly, fearfully. She didn't raise children, she had whispered. She raised roots. In the facility, Marilyn's drawings began to change. No longer just boxes or trees. Now they showed faces, the same face, over and over. Long black eyes, too many teeth. Children beneath her feet like roots beneath a tree. And in the corner of each drawing, a single word, Lucille. The knocking started again that night. Not just in Evelyn's house, not just in the woods, but in the dreams of anyone who had ever seen the boy's photo. Soft, rhythmic, knock, 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 followed by a whisper. One box was opened, many remain. March 2nd. The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days. Detective Winters stood beneath a sagging awning outside the Philadelphia Archives building, clutching the old file in one hand and a black coffee in the other. The photo of Miss Lucille Garrow stared up at him from the manila folder, sepia-toned, edges curling like old skin. He kept going back to the image, her stiff smile. The children behind her, all barefoot, all eerily alike. Too alike. He'd asked the archivist to pull records on any children placed with Lucille before her school was shut down in '49. There were 62 names on the ledger. Only 4 had ever been tracked down afterward. And of those 4, 2 were listed as deceased. Unnatural causes. Another was institutionalized. The 4th had no forwarding ring records, just a single note scrawled in pencil, "Refused to speak. Eyes gone white." In the psychiatric facility, Dr. Caro found Marilyn's bed empty. The night nurse swore she had been there for lights out, but the window was unlocked. Rain had blown in across the sill, and on the wall above her mattress, smeared in crayon and something darker, was a drawing. A tree. A box. And Marilyn standing at the edge of the clearing, her mouth a wide black circle. Eyes gone. Below it, in frantic lettering, "She's taking them back. She's hungry again." Evelyn Marsh knew what was coming. She had buried it for decades, lied to the police, burned the photos, moved again and again, but you can't outrun something that doesn't walk. Something that waits beneath the bark. Something that remembers every child. She knew because she had been one of them. Back in 1948, just 10 years old, she and her sister Ruth had been dropped at the Garrow Home for Wayward Children, a large, crooked farmhouse deep in the woods, far from any town. Lucille had been kind at first. Warm food, soft beds, chores that weren't too hard, but always rules. Never go near the tree, never open the boxes, never ask about the knocking. Ruth had broken the last rule. One night, she asked why it knocked. The next morning, she was gone. Lucille said she ran away. But Evelyn knew the truth. She'd heard the scratching, she'd seen the shadows under the floorboards, and she remembered the way Lucille had smiled when Evelyn cried. That awful, knowing smile. Now in her final years, Evelyn took the locked tin from the back of her closet. Inside were only 2 things. A torn piece of the Garrow house ledger. A photo of Ruth, her face scribbled out in red ink. On the back of the photo, in Evelyn's own childhood handwriting. "She lives in the roots now." Back in the woods, Winters stared at the unearthed bones beneath the tree. The forensics team was still processing the scene, but they'd already confirmed it. Multiple children, buried at varying depths, some decades old. None were the boy in the box. That was what haunted Winters most. This wasn't even the same burial site. There were more, maybe dozens. He remembered something Evelyn had said to him in passing years ago, before she shut down. Lucille didn't just hide the bodies, she fed them. That night, Dr. Caro received a package at her apartment. No return address, just a small wooden box, tightly wrapped in twine. She stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. The wood was pale and dry, splintered at the corners. Carved into the lid was a symbol, the twisted tree. Inside, packed in dry moss, was a tooth, child-sized, like the one in Evelyn's basement. And beneath the moss, a torn corner of flannel blanket, blue and white checkered. Caro dropped the box as if it had burned her. That was the blanket from the boy in the box, the same one. But this wasn't a keepsake. It was a warning. Or worse, an invitation. The dream came again that night. Caro stood in a black forest. The trees were not trees, but long fingers stretching skyward, their bark made of faces, children's faces. Silent, eyes shut, mouths open. In the clearing stood the box, closed, and beside it Miss Lucille. Her face was unchanged, same dress, same iron gaze. She smiled at Caro. You came after all. Caro couldn't move, couldn't speak. Lucille leaned closer, whispering into her ear. One box opened, many remain. Let's not keep them waiting. In the morning, the police found Evelyn Marsh dead in her chair. No sign of forced entry, no wounds, but her eyes were wide, lips parted in a final gasp. And on the wall above her, written in what could only be described as mud and blood, was the phrase, "Ruth is waiting." In the woods that day, one of the forensic techs uncovered something unusual beneath the oldest roots. Not bones, not a box, but a door. Flat, wooden, about 3 feet square, sunken into the earth and sealed with iron nails. It took 4 men to pry it open. What they found beneath it would later be redacted from the official reports. But Winters saw it, a staircase, spiral, made of bone, leading down, and from the depths so faint it might have been imagined came the sound of a child's voice. Knock, knock, knock. The staircase didn't creak. That was the first thing Detective Winters noticed. Even though it was made of bone, some carved into steps, others twisted into rails, the descent was silent. The forensics team above had refused to follow. Not out of cowardice, they insisted, but because the air changed the moment the trapdoor opened. It smelled like wet teeth and dead leaves. Winters had descended alone. His flashlight flickered every few steps, the darkness pressing in like a vice. The deeper he went, the more the tunnel seemed to curve, not just down, but inward, like he was spiraling into the hollow of something ancient. 30 steps down, the walls changed. No longer packed earth, no longer roots, but wood, soaked and aged, pulsing faintly with moisture. He stepped onto a landing. A narrow hallway stretched before him, the ceiling low, the walls carved with those same symbols he'd seen burned into the tree above. He touched one. His skin stung instantly. He pulled away, and ahead, just faintly, he heard a lullaby, off-key, whispered, female. Above ground, Dr. Caro stood at the crime scene tape, rain seeping into her shoes. The forest had gone quiet again. She hadn't even told the hospital she was leaving. She just knew she had to come. The voices had been relentless the night before, not in her dreams, in her walls. They'd whispered in the vents, scratched from the floorboards. One voice in particular had reached through her skull like a hooked finger. You know me, Louise, you always have. Caro stared at the open trapdoor. Something radiated from it, an absence. She looked at the officer on duty. Did someone already go in? He nodded. Detective Winters said not to follow. How long ago? The officer checked his watch. Almost 45 minutes. Winters pressed deeper into the hall. The whisper song grew clearer. Come, little children, rest your heads. The roots are soft. The soil is red. The words were familiar. He'd heard the same rhyme on one of Marilyn's drawings, written in her jagged scrawl under a picture of the tree. Back then he thought it was nonsense. Now he wasn't so sure. He passed what looked like rooms, tiny, recessed cubbies in the wall, each one about the size of a large dog kennel. Inside, bones, broken toys, rotting scraps of flannel, and in one, a teddy bear with no eyes. Its head turned as he passed. He didn't stop. Back in her apartment, a nurse found Marilyn's journal tucked beneath her mattress. The pages were filled with symbols, some repeated over and over. But in the very back, written in childlike print, was a map. A crude sketch of the woods, a tree, a box, and underneath, in bold letters, "She lives below." Winters reached the end of the hallway. A circular chamber opened up before him, the ceiling high, the center dominated by an altar made of mismatched bones, the bones of children, dozens. Some etched with names, others cracked down the middle as though something had sucked the marrow out. And above the altar hung a figure, arms outstretched, neck crooked, pale dress soaked with black sap, Miss Lucille Garrow. But it wasn't just her body. It moved, not like something alive, but like something remembered. Her head turned slowly, her eyes opened. Empty sockets stared into Winter's soul. "You opened it," she whispered, her voice like leaves dragging across stone. He raised his flashlight, hand trembling. "You're dead. They said you died in 52. Lucille grinned. "I'm not a who, dear. I'm a where." The ground trembled, roots erupted from the walls, lashing toward him. Above, Dr. Caro screamed. The ground around the tree had begun to split, cracks spiraling outward like veins. Children's laughter echoed from the forest. Not playful, hungry. Back below, Winters ducked, roots slashing through the air. He turned to run, but the hallway was gone. The spiral stairway no longer behind him, only darkness. The chamber began to fold in, walls breathing like lungs. Lucille's voice grew louder. "They fed me, long before you found your little boy. One box opened the wound, now the others are bleeding." "Why?" Winters shouted. "Why the children?" Her face shifted, warped like melting wax. "Because they're unfinished." And behind her the altar began to open, a crack in the bone, a lid to something inside, something old, something still moving. Dr. Caro sprinted for the trapdoor. She didn't care what the officer shouted. She didn't care about protocol or safety. She just knew Winters was down there and that something was about to come up. Before she could reach it, the roots shot from the ground and wrapped around the frame. The forest screamed. Every tree bent inward toward the clearing, groaning. And then, silence. Underground, Winters stared into the open altar. It wasn't a coffin, it was a mouth, lined with teeth made of bone. The same bone as the children. And from within, a voice, deep, feminine, but impossibly large, filled his skull. "Feed the roots." The mouth in the altar didn't open wide, it opened deep, a black gullet coiling downward like an endless throat. The sound it made wasn't a growl or roar, it was breathing, slow, measured, patient. Winters couldn't move. Not because he was trapped, but because something in that cavernous whisper rooted him in place, like his bones had decided to stop listening to his brain. The altar pulsed. From its edge, the shadows of children stretched and curled across the floor, trailing like smoke. He saw tiny faces in them, dozens, some grinning, some hollow-eyed, others twisted in agony. They circled him, and then they began to hum. "One by one we climbed the stair. She said we'd play. She said she'd care." The walls trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. The tree above, Winters realized, was just the tip, a single tooth above a buried jaw. Dr. Caro stared down at the trapdoor as it pulsed, the surrounding soil shifting like it was trying to breathe through the ground. The officer behind her muttered prayers. Caro pressed her hand to the bark of the nearby tree. It was warm. The moment she touched it, her head filled with voices. Not whispers this time. Screams. Children. Women. One was Winters. "Get out! Get out! She's still eating." She backed away, heart pounding. Then she saw it. At the base of the tree, beneath a curled patch of roots, something moved. A small hand, pale, pressed to the dirt from underneath. She dropped to her knees and began to dig. In the chamber below, Lucille stepped closer, or rather, was pulled closer. Her feet didn't move. The roots beneath her simply advanced like she was on rails made of flesh and rot. "You think this is about him?" she said softly. "The little boy you keep chasing?" She pointed to the shadows coiling by the altar's mouth. "He was just the latest spoonful." Winter's voice cracked. "You killed him." Lucille tilted her head. "No, detective, you did. You opened the first box. You fed her memory. You let the roots grow again." She smiled. "And now, she's waking up." Caro dug until her nails broke. The soil gave way in wet chunks, black and reeking. She could see more now, an entire arm frail and stiff, the edge of a face, not decomposed, not buried long, a child, no older than 6. She called out, "I need medics, now," but her voice was lost in the trees. Then the child's eyes opened, pure white, and it spoke. "There's no top, there's only down." The shadows in the underground chamber began to rise. They weren't spirits, they weren't illusions. They were memories, made flesh. Children that never left. Children that Lucille took into the tree. Children whose names had been forgotten so long, they existed only as shapes. But they remembered him. Winter stumbled backward. "No. I'm not one of you," they whispered, "but you opened the door." A dozen small hands reached toward him. "Join us, it's safer in the roots." He turned to run, but the tunnel behind him had closed, sealed with rib cages fused like cement. Lucille's voice echoed. You think death ends this? She laughed. Oh, detective, the box was just the invitation. Caro tried to pull the child free, but the body wouldn't move. Roots had pierced through its back, into its legs, like wires plugged into a machine. She gasped as one slithered toward her wrist. She pulled back, too slow. The root wrapped her hand, tight, and in a flash her vision flipped. She stood in a different forest, one made of bone and black leaves. The sky pulsed red, and all around her, boxes, thousands of them, each slightly open, each knocking. Then she saw the tree, colossal, stretching into the sky like a vein in God's throat. At its base, Lucille. But it wasn't her anymore. She was part of the bark, her face embedded, her mouth split open like a feeding maw. Caro tried to scream, but the roots pushed her back into her body. She collapsed on the dirt, gasping. The child was gone. Only the empty hole remained. In the chamber, Winters had reached the altar. He didn't know why. Maybe some part of him believed if he looked into the mouth, he'd find the answer. Find the boy, find some reason. But what he saw inside wasn't a body, it was a mirror. A dark, pulsing, alive mirror. He saw himself, younger, crying in a box, his own childhood, his own screams, forgotten by everyone. Lucille's voice whispered behind him. That's how I found them, that's how she finds them. Children forgotten by the world, left behind. That emptiness, it's a signal. Winters reached toward the image, and the mirror reached back. On the surface, Dr. Caro opened her eyes. The tree had gone still. No wind, no sound. Even the birds were silent. And then a long, shuddering crack split the bark down the center. Something beneath it moaned, a deep, gurgling sound, not human. She took a step back. Then the whisper came again from behind her, from nowhere. 1 down, 61 to go. The children poured from the tree in utter silence. Their feet didn't touch the forest floor. They hovered inches above the ground, floating not as spirits but as echoes, dragged forward by memory's pull. Each one carried something. A doll, a shard of mirror, a burned letter, a jawbone. None of them looked older than 10. None of them had eyes. Dr. Caro stood transfixed as they passed her. They didn't see her, or perhaps they remembered her, and had already forgotten what she meant to them. Her breath caught as the smallest one stopped. It held out a music box, blood on the hinges. It began to play. If you love me, let me sleep. If you don't, the roots run deep. Caro turned and ran. Underground, Winters was still on his knees. The altar's mirror no longer shimmered. It showed a door. That same black barked door, deep below even this place, at the bottom of the forest's memory. He could see his name carved into it now, Rovan Winters. Lucille placed her hand on his shoulder. It's not punishment, she said sweetly. It's belonging. You were alone when you found her, just like all of us. Winters looked up. Who is she? Lucille smiled wider. She's the one who remembers the forgotten, the mother the world turned its back on. She offers the only thing the lost crave, a place to stay. He stood slowly and took a step toward the altar. Above, the children spread through the forest and into town. By the time authorities realized something was wrong, it was too late. They came to the edge of the woods and saw boxes, dozens, hundreds, all sizes, all different. And from each a whisper, open me. Some did, and were never seen again. The rest watched as the children floated down the streets of the old town, passing playgrounds, shuttered schools, and old empty houses. They didn't attack, they were looking. Dr. Caro made it back to the dig site. The officers were gone. In their place, more boxes. Some had blood around the hinges. Others, carvings on the lids. I asked for help. No one came. She heard me. Caro climbed into her SUV, gunning the engine. The forest behind her groaned. She drove faster than she ever had in her life, trying to get away from the whisper growing louder in her ears. You left them. You left them all. Winters stepped into the altar. There was no resistance, no pain. It swallowed him like fog. He didn't fall. He sank. The world above faded. The smell of earth turned to rot. The warmth turned cold. And then he was standing in the root chamber, a vast circular space carved from living roots. In the center, the mother tree. Its bark was shaped like skin, its knots like eyes. At its base, dozens of doors, some open, most not. And at the center, hers. His door. He approached. Lucille followed, silent now. The roots pulsed. The voices returned, clearer this time. We remember you, Rovan. You were the first to look, the first to run, the first to try and forget. But forgetting is just the doorway. He reached for the handle. In town, parents began finding empty beds, locks undone, closets open, and in the yards, boxes, all identical, all humming. Some didn't open them, some did. And as they did, they remembered things they'd buried decades ago. A sibling lost, a child that vanished, a mistake they tried to erase, and each memory fed the roots. Back underground, Winters opened the door and saw himself. As a child, sitting in the box beneath his childhood house, clutching a wooden figure. He turned and for the first time saw what had always been behind him. The face in the dark, made of teeth and branches and lullabies. She whispered, in a voice that was neither male nor female, "Now you understand. You are not the forgotten. You are the one who left." The chamber at the root of the forest was quiet now, not silent, listening. Detective Rovin Winters stood before the black-barked door, bearing his forgotten name. Inside, the boy he once was, curled around a memory he'd buried beneath years of duty, divorce, and death. Lucille Garrow stood behind him, no longer smiling. Her face had started to change, flesh flaking like bark, eyes bleeding sap. The forest had claimed her completely. "You can stay," she said, voice like leaves scraping stone. "You'll never be alone again. She'll keep you, like she kept me, like she keeps them all." Winters stared at the child him behind the door. That boy had no tears left, only wide, aching eyes that had seen something wrong in the dark and had never stopped pretending he hadn't. "I didn't know," Winters whispered. "I thought I just imagined it." Lucille nodded. "That's what forgetting does. It writes new walls over old wounds. But she remembers, and now, so do you." Dr. Carroll parked on the edge of the town square. The sky had dimmed, not with clouds, but with the root canopy now spreading above, weaving over rooftops like veins across skin. No sign of the other agents or the locals, only boxes. So many boxes. A child stepped into her path, little, hair matted, holding a mirror with no reflection. "You have one too," he said in a voice like echoing wind. "What?" Caro asked. "A box." He pointed to her chest, and she remembered. She was 5, hiding from her father during one of his rages, crawled into the storm shelter, found a small wooden crate there. Inside, a name she didn't recognize written on a ribbon, but she kept it, hid it, and years later, threw it in a river. That night, the dreams began. She thought they'd stopped. They hadn't. The boy blinked. "You opened her. That means you're part of her now." Caro fell to her knees. Underground, Winters stepped into the final room. The door closed behind him with a sound like cracking bone. There were no walls here, just an endless plain of soil and black roots. And one figure at the center, not monstrous, not grotesque. She looked kind, old, ageless. Her face built from pieces of others, cheeks of a mother who died in childbirth, eyes from a girl who drowned in 1924, a mouth shaped like mercy and malice in equal parts. She opened her arms. "Come home." Winters looked down. The child him stood at his side now, holding the wooden doll from long ago, the one with no face. And then, slowly, it began to grow features. His features. "You're not a monster," Winters said to her. "You're a memory machine." "No," she replied. "I'm what memory becomes when it's buried long enough, when no one listens, when no one comes. I feed on the forgotten." She tilted her head. "You're just my first." Above ground, the town was gone. No buildings, no sky, just a canopy of roots glowing with dim reddish light like being inside a womb made of trees. Boxes opened one by one and the children stepped through, back into the root, back into her. Dr. Carrow stood at the center, the last one not taken. Lucille's voice echoed across the trees. "She is awake now." Carrow opened her mouth to scream, but a root slipped gently between her lips, and she remembered everything. Winters knelt in the root chamber. The child beside him reached out, offering the doll, the faceless one, now complete. Winters took it. His hands shook. "You want me to stay?" The root mother nodded. "Then no one will forget you again. Not your pain, not your cries, not your silence." The boy Winters stepped forward and embraced her. The mother figure cradled him, and then she looked to the grown Winters. "You are the seed, Rovin. It was always going to end with you." He looked up. "And?" She smiled sadly. "You wanted peace. You wanted someone to know." She placed her hand on his chest. "And now, the story ends inside you." Back on the surface, all the boxes shut, in unison. Every tree stopped moving. The canopy retracted, the soil dried, the town square reappeared, empty but intact. Dr. Carrow lay in the center, breathing, alone. A single wooden box beside her, carved with the name, Rovin Winters, She opened it. Inside, a badge, a doll, a photo of a boy with hollow eyes, and one final note written in a child's handwriting. I remember now, and that's enough. They never found Winters. The forest returned to normal within days, just trees and dirt and silence. But the locals whispered about strange dreams, about children speaking languages they never learned, about knocks on closet doors 3 at a time, always around 2:13 a.m. Dr. Kara left the bureau. She moved west, bought a cabin far from trees. She never answered calls, never opened packages, but she kept the box. She never opened it again, not because she was afraid to see more, but because deep down she understood what it was. And remember, to never forget your roots.